From Connecticut Public Radio in Hartford, this is Audacious. I'm Jessica Severin D. Martinez, in for Kyone Wolf. I'm a producer of the show, and that means I'm usually off mic, researching show ideas, inviting guests, and coming up with interview questions. But when the idea for this show came up, Kyone asked if I would sit in the host chair for the very first time. And that's because I'm a mother of an 8 and a 12-year-old. Our guest today, Jayson Greene, had an experience no parent should have to endure. It was 2015 and his daughter, Greta, had just turned 2. She was sitting on a bench with her grandma on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. A piece of masonry fell from an 8th-story windowsill, striking Greta in the head and killing her. He details this heartbreaking loss and how he processed it in his memoir, Once More We Saw Stars. This episode will discuss the loss of his young child. It was recorded exactly 9 years after the accident, on May 17th, 2024. Jayson and his wife, Stacy, were in their late 30s when they decided to have Greta, their first child. Jayson was working as an editor, and Stacy had just changed careers. I asked him to take me back to that time in his life, right before she was born.
So we were on the treadmill of your early 30s, and we were, upwardly mobile young professionals, as the acronym goes, kind of in that phase of our lives. And we were very ready to be starting our family. So we'd been trying for a couple of months, and I still remember standing over the sink with my wife in the tiny bathroom, waiting for the pregnancy test to come back, and the look of like her open-mouthed surprise and joy as she turned to me and gave me this big hug when we discovered that she was pregnant. And I walked around with this clear, calm sense of good fortune, and there was incipient beauty that was coming to meet us, right? And I just knew with more clarity than I'd known before that our lives were going to be full of, of everything we wanted our lives to be full of. It was glorious. That's who we were then.
Wow. And if you take me back to April 27, 2013, the day you welcomed Greta into the world, what was that like?
I mean, still the, one of the best days of my life. We had what we can look back on for ourselves and our memories as a very lucky and very unimpeded birth of our first child. And I choose my words because I know that people have all kinds of births, right? And people who don't have a birth plan that went how they hoped it would still have the child, and they have to live with and figure out how to feel about what it meant to bring that child into the world for them. And so I'm always careful to sort of talk about it, because for us, it went the way we hoped. Stacy delivered naturally. We had our doula come over and spend the night with us, sort of. There's a funny moment where Stacy's, in various states of undress because she's in labor, and we're in our own home, and I'm just sort of out of my mind. And at one point I walk out of the shower completely naked into the bedroom and forget that the doula's there, and she covered her eyes. And I'm so sorry, And I remember holding Greta to my chest after she'd been delivered, and feeling that age-old feeling that's older than all of us, where you feel these chemicals flood you. It was the most glorious day. I still remember the quality of the sunlight coming in through the windows, and it was beautiful.
What was Greta like as a baby and a toddler?
Yeah. Greta, sort of one of our sayings, things we would say to her, was nothing's going to get you down. Because I remember we had to give her a shot or two, and she had terrible diarrhea, because your system is all a mess from from all these things entering into it, and we're changing her on the table, and she's a mess, and she's just looking up at us kicking with these big happy eyes. And Stacy and I were like, nothing's going to get you down, right? She was a really easy baby, as I remember. I mean, then life cranks the difficulty meter little by little, and then it starts going faster and faster, And I would say that our number one struggle when Greta got to be a little bit older, still in a crib, I mean, she never left a crib, was her sleep. Everyone, of course, there's no parent on earth who will not regale you with their tales of woe about, oh, the sleep, oh, the sleep. And in our case, it was not a child who would not go to bed. It was a child who woke up before the sun did every morning and was just very ready to be together at all times, 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, just, to the point where the sun came up over the tops of the buildings was a luxury. We just didn't get to do it. So I just like to think of her as being very alert. That's a word people use to describe her. She had a very alert sense of the world. And when she looked at you, it was sort of like you were being affixed with a very arresting gaze from a person who clearly had already done a lot of thinking.
And then 9 years ago today, everything changed. Are you able to tell me what happened on Sunday, May 17th, 2015?
Yeah. Greta had spent the night at her grandmother's, as she had countless times. And we were going to go catch a matinee before we went to go pick her up. And I checked my phone on, just because people check their phones constantly, mindlessly. Had no reason to. Was just glancing at my phone and saw that I missed a call from Susan. And then Stacy pulled out her phone and saw that she'd missed a call too. And just we had a bad sense. And the phone call was in the elevator on the way down. We were going from the 4th floor to the 1st floor when I caught her on the phone. Her voice was fuzzy. We could hear people in the background. And she said, "Oh, Jayson, it's so terrible." And I don't know what I knew, but you know, how animals react to weather before it happens. How you can see their body change, right? They know something that you don't. They can't think, but they know. And I think that's how it felt before she told us that she'd been hit. And then when I found out she'd been hit in the head, I remember Stacy screaming, just screaming, no, screaming it, and we ran out of the building and got into the car. And it wasn't until I got to the passenger side seat of the car that I was able to isolate Susan's attention. She'd been hit. She was in shock long enough to confirm that the piece of brick that Greta had been hit with was large. And when I heard that, I just knew that we were never going to have our daughter back again. I didn't know that it meant that she was going to be dead, but I knew that it meant that whatever I knew her as was gone. And we drove up the FDR holding hands and Stacy sobbing and just saying over and over again, she has to be okay because there's no other option. She just has to be. And we got to the hospital. I still remember stepping in the ER, people looking at us because it's somehow, it was as if everyone knew that we were the parents of this doomed child, and I stepped in and saw Greta and she was in her diaper. And her mouth was open. And I don't remember what her head looked like, thankfully. And I knew that she was never coming back without knowing. It was over and I knew it. And I went back and I sat on a gray plastic chair and just felt the ocean swallowing, I stopped hearing anything. It was the beginning of the end. It was the hell. It was the first. I sat down into hell, right? I was like, I knew the minute my butt touched the chair. I sat down and thought, this is hell, in the exact same sort of motion and instant.
You've used the words cocoon of shock to describe what it felt like going through those intense moments of trauma. I'd like to hear more about that initial phase.
Yeah. If a really, really loud noise happens, your eardrums kind of cover themselves up and you can't hear anything and people are waving at you like this. And I don't have a good analog. I think anyone who's ever been unlucky enough to experience catastrophic shock knows that it's a very specific feeling. It's very clear. It covers everything, right? There is no question in your head. The stillness is lunar in its quality. It is, you step on the moon, you put your feet up and the dust doesn't move, right? Because there's no air to move it. And that is how your mind is. Your system has fallen completely silent because you are passing through a moment in your life that your body will remember until you're dead. And not many moments in your life happen on that level. And your body is like an audience falling into silence right before the show. It knows. And it happens to you. Your mind is suddenly the least important organ in your body.
You were with her in the hospital for a day, and Greta died the next day.
She was already gone. She spent 3 hours on the operating table. A neurosurgeon was trying to remove pieces of her skull to allow her brain room to swell. But he came in and told us that the bleed was ominous, was the word he used. And that it would, Stacy asked, "Are you saying it would take a miracle?" And all he said was, "I'd love to be wrong." So we knew she was gone. The doctor called us in. So before we even saw her, when we saw her again, she was our dead daughter. She was on life support, but she was our dead daughter on life support. That's who we were going to go see. It was the worst moment of my life. It was the worst moment I'll ever live. It's the worst moment anyone can ever live. It is the bottom of human experience.
That was Jayson Greene, a writer and editor from New York. When we get back,
I told Greta, I said, "I'm so sorry. I am so sorry, but I'm going to have to forget you just a little bit in order to move on."
I'm Jessica Severin de Martinez, in for Kion Wolf. This is Audacious. Stay with me. This is Audacious. I'm Jessica Severin de Martinez, sitting in for Kion Wolf. Today we're hearing from Jayson Greene. In 2015, his 2-year-old daughter, Greta, died after being hit in the head by a falling piece of masonry. Jayson's memoir, Once More We Saw Stars, came out in 2019. I read it over 2 days and it tore me apart, not only as a mom, but also as a human being. Jayson managed to find words for the unthinkable. His observations read, sound, and feel like poetry. What he writes about is deeply painful, but there's so much beauty in how he captures it. He writes, quote, "There is a visible trail of crisis in the ER entryway about arriving at the hospital after the accident. And about his return to work? I am ice skating along the surface of my shock." Let's get back to our conversation. As a writer and editor, words are your medium. That's how you express yourself. But I can't imagine that there's anything that prepares you for having to write an obituary for your 2-year-old child. What role have words and language played in the aftermath of dealing with this loss for you?
It's like you're quadriplegic, or you're supposed to be, and then you discover your pinky finger can still move. We're supposed to be all shut down, but it seems as though that wire is still connected. Isn't that interesting? And so you practice moving your pinky finger just because you can, right? You can't move your legs, you can't swallow, you can't do anything else, but you can move your pinky finger. It's the only thing you can do. That's how I felt about my ability to make words. It just didn't shut down. And so I recorded them. They were coming. What else there was nothing else to do. So that was in the blast of the shock of knowing our daughter was dead. And after we had waited the day that it took to find recipients for her organs, and we left the hospital, it was as if we'd exited the ninth circle, right? We knew that we were leaving. We were going, it's a very real, concrete way in which that metaphor acts, because you're going from a place with no sense of day or night out into the sunlight again. You have entered and exited this place in which all these infernal things took place. And it was then that it's like the pain really floods in. And because I wasn't going to cease existing, it became important to me writing was like the slow act of mending back together. It was the physical therapy that sort of stitched my soul back to my mind. And I wrote every day. And again, it wasn't with purpose. It was the way that you move when you've been hurt. It's just the way that you know to move, and it has to be done. And so that was what I did. I wrote in my journal. I had a document called Grief Notes that was already titled with dates on it starting the 20th. And that was the seed in the dirt. That was it. That was where it became possible for me to later in my life and later in my journey decide that what I had done was begin a project.
Right. And I've got the project in my hands right now, your beautiful memoir, Once More We Saw Stars. What you just said reminded me of one sentence in the book where you say, Earth is now an alien planet and I am a visitor. And this book, I can only recommend to any and everyone to read it. It has torn me open in so many ways. It's beautifully written. And I'm curious what the role of the fear of forgetting played in wanting to get this out into the world.
Yeah. I think that it was more complicated, but that I do think my fear of forgetting her spurred me on, especially in the weeks after she died. The words can exist because something has to in the absence of your daughter. There cannot be no daughter and no words to remember her by either, right? Photos are interesting because photos, they're both yours and not. They are snapshots of objective reality that you kind of recorded on your phone, and you can look at them and feel a tremendous amount of distance from them, even though they purport to show you your life. Anyone who's ever had a change in their lives knows that that's how it feels. You look at pictures of yourself in a previous marriage, or, when you were an evangelical Christian and now you aren't anymore. And you're like, who is that person? And it doesn't make you feel connected. It makes you feel alienated. But words are yours. At least this is how it is for me. Words represent the deepest part of you, the part of you that's talking. And I had to write down everything I could remember about her because the only thing that mattered was that my impressions and memories of her were truly the only things that were actually just mine. They were my precious cargo and mine alone. And so writing down how she laughed, what she said, and this is something that you will hear when you speak to bereaved parents, all of them, anyone, people who have never put pen to paper to express themselves before will tell you that they wrote down their memories because they had to exist somewhere. So, yeah, I would say that in the first 2 months after she died, it became both a manner of survival, and the fear of forgetting was definitely spurring a compulsion to record as many details as I could summon. But I also know that 3 or 4 days after she died, I was outside wandering around in what was my then neighborhood in Brooklyn. And there are these big trees, really big old trees, and these big old houses. We didn't live in one, but they were all around. And I was taking a walk down the block. I had needed to get away from the enclosure of the apartment and, take a step outside. And I was having this sort of sense of communication with her. And I remember the trees were moving. There was wind. It was beautiful. It's a beautiful day. And I told Greta, I said, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry, but I'm going to have to forget you just a little bit in order to move on. I remember the trees waved back to me. Because grieving entails honoring your memories, but to honor your memories is to admit that they have a finite existence. You don't remember what happened to you. You remember what you think happened to you. You remember what you remember happened to you, right? Every year that goes by adds a protective layer of coating of analysis. Whatever it is that you thought you remember that you wanted to hold on to, what you hold on to in the end is a desire to hold on, right? The actual physical concrete memory is like myth at that point,
Yeah, when I read about your memories of Greta, it brought me right back to the infant and toddler stages of my own kids. I have 2 kids. They are 8 and 12 now. And being transported back to having a baby that's milk drunk, that's learning to walk. Those are the kinds of memories that we accumulate. And as time goes on, some of these memories get replaced with others. Has the way that you remember Greta or the memories you hold on to changed over time?
Yes, of course. Yeah. I hold her somewhere so deep inside of me, right? I mean, that's the thing, is that what we lose it just becomes inaccessible to us. It does not go anywhere. There is no memory you have that leaves you. Even I think in cases where people are experiencing the sort of degradation of their brain that leads to loss of certain kinds of memories, because memories don't just live in your brain, they live in your whole body. And I find that in moments of great distress or profound sorrow, my body coughs things up that I don't have access to. You don't know that they're there, but they are. So my memories of Greta are inside of me, but they've traveled pretty deep inside. The actual memories. I've often thought, and I remember I also wrote this down. I had a strange, sort of vista vision about who I was and where I was going to be in the aftermath of her death. It was like I was standing in the middle of like a Midwestern country looking in all directions, and there's plains, there's nothing to occlude your view, and there's also nothing to tell you how far away you are from the horizon or from where you think you're going to be. It's like you're everywhere at once, and that is how I remember thinking and feeling. And I remember writing down inside of that headspace, I will probably remember you on my deathbed, Greta. Because I do think that in those transitional moments, this is where these things that live inside of you come up out of you, right? And people who know you, I mean, if they're present, they might hear you say something that they've never heard you say. Grandmothers who, apologize to lost babies on their way out of the world or something. It is the place where you unburden yourself of all your oldest and deepest memories. And I think that now that it's been 9 years and we've accumulated so much more life, that only moves through and out of old experiences, that's where I keep her now.
And when you and your wife decided to have a second child, what went into that decision?
I mean, quite simply, we wanted to be parents. And we never wanted to stop being parents. We had to be. It was part of who we were. And so it wasn't much of a question. There were questions about our timing. There were questions about, how do I feel in my heart right now? And I do think that I just went on this very sort of long reflection about how you can interrogate yourself. But I do think there are thoughts that you should have, right, about having parents, and so about becoming parents and having children. And doubly so when you are doing in the wake of catastrophic grief. And I think that we were very careful about knowing that each of us wanted children just because we needed it. We needed to raise a child. We weren't performing some kind of mathematical equation with our family in our head where we needed to replace one with the other, right? I mean, but it was never any question in our minds. And so, 6 months after Greta died, Stacy was pregnant again. And we had been trying for a couple months already by then. So,
are you a different parent to Harrison than you were to Greta?
Well, it's difficult to say because I've been a parent to Harrison through so many phases of his life that Greta didn't reach. Now, Greta died at 2 years old and 1 month. That is still a toddler. That she was a very bright, inquisitive, and chatty toddler with a lot of things to say, but she was still inherently a very small child. We didn't get to see who she would have become in elementary school, what kind of person she would have been in the class, what kind of friends or enemies she might have made or acquired in that time. So, I mean, I have no analog. And the first 2 years are caretaking. There's so much about parenthood, and I hate to use this word, it sounds crass, but it occurred to me, they're custodial in a very real sense. You are following around and picking up after and attending to and feeding and changing and loving, but your kids' needs are immediate and they're clear. And so it was almost like we just entered into that fever dream of early parenting twice, separated by a confusing interval of, this darkness and confusion. And there was a very real, like, didn't I do this before confusion, like glitch in the matrix sense to my life, where I looked around and everything seemed slightly unreal. I had a child, they were young, I was on a playground, I was glancing up at the sky. It was a different neighborhood, it was a different child, it was a different playground, right? And I was older, right? It was confusing to feel. And then when he grew older, and I spoke about this recently, much older, then all of a sudden it was as if my internal time clock, and again, this speaks to how there are things in you that you don't know until it's time, rang. And it was saying to me, you're now the parent that you thought you'd be. And it's 4 years later, you know? You're now the parent that you imagined becoming to your daughter, except now you're older. It's a different child, a different neighborhood. But now you're having the conversations with other parents on the playground about your kids' performance in class and their all this stuff. And I think that as a parent, I mean, a lot of me is probably essentially the same. I suspect that there is a hint of I always want to protect the ones I love. It's an impulse that's deep rooted. I think that I do have a sort of mother bear hovering quality or aspect to the way that I love the people in my family. I think that was true already. And I think that parenting a child through through the knowledge that he'd have some dark things in his life that he had to make sense of, maybe made me more that than I was. I think that I had to face up to my own deep desire for my son to never have any negative feelings pretty early, right?
Yeah. Do you talk to him about Greta?
Yes, of course. He knows that she died and how. And we don't talk about her in the sense of sitting down to dinner and, oh, remember when Greta did this? Remember when Greta did that? Both because it doesn't quite feel natural to our personal dynamic. We have a child right here with plenty to talk about his day. And I think also there's a certain sense that we've chosen to let his relationship to her emerge a bit more from him. I mean, we don't hide pictures of her or anything like that, you know. And when we were printing photos off of my phone as an activity, I'm like, let's get one of your sister in there, And he's like, let me see, and I'll show him a couple. But then, if he asks a question, I will answer that question and we move on. But there isn't a sense that like she occupies this space in our home that has its like clear spot in the order of things. She's someone that we're all aware of. And he in particular, I think, has had a lot of pretty complex thoughts about what it means to have a sister who died before he was born. He never got to meet. Only children already sometimes struggle with the feeling that they need another kid around. And I think for him, it's been sharpened by the sense that there was another kid. He just never met her.
Right. Yeah, you said it in the book, a second only child.
Yep, that's exactly it. Yep. That's exactly it.
That was Jayson Greene, author of Once More We Saw Stars. After the break,
I like the way that the book can serve to bring people closer to us in a very short period of time. I feel a sort of gratitude towards that book because it does this hard work on my behalf.
I'm Jessica Severin de Martinez, in for Chion Wolf. This is Audacious. Stay tuned. This is Audacious. I'm Jessica Severin de Martinez, guest hosting for Chion Wolf. You're hearing from Jayson Greene. His daughter Greta died when she was 2 years old. She was sitting on a bench with her grandmother when a brick fell from a building and struck her. This happened on May 17th, 2015. I spoke with Jayson exactly 9 years later. Let's get back to our conversation. There isn't one single thing or person to blame for what happened with Greta.
No.
How do you reflect on that?
The world is chaotic and imperfect and filled with, improperly maintained things. Humans tend towards chaos and entropy as much as or more at times as they do towards order and harmony. And we were caught by a piece of it. We lived our lives without much of any sort of widespread calamity affecting us personally. And I mean, there's not much else for me to say about it, honestly. There's a lot about the particulars of it that I could go into, but none of those really matter to me. In the essence of it, what happened to us was calamity reached us, right? I mean, look around the world. Look how many people calamity is reaching right now. Look how many millions of people have been blown apart by the forces of calamity.
When I'm out with just one of my two daughters and out at the playground, I make some awkward small talk with strangers. People sometimes ask if she's my only one.
Sure.
How do you handle interactions like that?
The answer is yes. As far as you know, and as far as you can see, this is my only child, right? I mean, it's interesting because a lot of people have a much more complicated relationship with this question who've lost children than I do. Because I live in this world where, people have their phones and, after they meet you, they plug your name in and they look you up because they want to see what your Facebook page is or what your whatever is. And in this case, I have a book that pops up and tells them something about me that they didn't have any idea about. And the next time I see them, I either find out that someone I met already knew when they met me and didn't want to say anything because they, found out one way or another. Or, I've had new friends who we've met, and then the next time I see them, they've read my entire book. And then and what's interesting about that is that I like the way that the book can serve to bring people closer to us in a very short period of time. It's very raw. It tells you a lot about us. There's nothing in there that's like cushioned against what it was. And I think that you can read that and it's like learning about someone before you went to the room. I mean, I think that I feel a sort of gratitude towards that book because it does this hard work on my behalf. And I'm sure that subconsciously I put it out there so that it could follow ahead of me. And in a way I could be behind it and people could see the book. And then that would make my life, my passage through the world less fraught with difficulty and pain. I'm sure that somewhere I wanted that. It's extraordinarily rare in my life that I am talking to some person in like a completely banal, mundane, everyday exchange, and I find myself having to tell them that I had a daughter who was killed by a falling brick, right? I mean, when we first moved to the neighborhood and we were meeting people, it would sometimes happen. The book hadn't yet come out, but yeah.
Yeah. What do you wish people understood about the experience of losing a child?
God, nothing. I really wish nobody understood anything about the experience of losing a child. Nothing at all. Nothing that they wouldn't ordinarily apply to their lessons about treating someone else in their life with compassion and empathy who's lost someone. I've said this a lot, and I have a hard time even following my own advice, especially 9 years after my own trauma, when you feel a bit like you've rejoined the ranks of everyday citizens. That was an air quotes for those of us who are on audio. You don't have as day-to-day relationship with the reality of your own trauma. And I sometimes not worry, but I sometimes ruminate on how I could be closer to my own trauma on a day-to-day level, right? I mean, it's hard to sometimes be like, well, what I'm going to do today instead of the laundry is think about my relationship to this catastrophic accident that happened 9 years ago today. But I do think that it's important for everyone because I know from a very visceral standpoint how it feels to be the person to whom the unthinkable thing has happened. And I could tell people with complete clarity in those moments of my life, all I want is for people to be here. They don't have to be saying smart things. I don't care if they say, I'm sorry for your loss, or, oh my God, I think about this happening to me. I mean, yes, that would be kind of a silly thing to say, but ultimately it doesn't matter to me. Your fumbled words are so trivial when weighed against the act of someone being with you, right? Physically being there. That is what I think everyone who's lost someone. I mean, I can't speak for everyone, and there may be people to whom what you say and how you say it is more meaningful. But for me, I could say, I don't know what to say to me either. And you sure shouldn't. It's brave of you to come, brave of you to even be here. You know, I had people show up holding 2 grocery bags of food and there were tears streaming down their eyes. You know, they probably didn't imagine that they would show up looking like that, but I didn't care. What did I care? You know, it was just the fact that they had come, and I'll remember them for the rest of my life. The person for whom you show up, regardless of what you say, will remember that you were there for them for the rest of their life. Well, that's what I would say, I guess. But it has nothing to do with losing a child and everything to do with loss.
Yeah, the randomness of tragedy can be very difficult to live with for any of us. And knowing that there is potential for something like this to happen anytime and anywhere, there's no way to prevent it. Have you found any practices, any philosophies that help you navigate the reality that life is just so unpredictable?
Happiness and hope are not feelings that are contingent on the world. They are feelings that you give to your own self that come from within, and that only matter insofar as you're able to share them with others, right? If you only have a hope when something around you is giving that to you, then that isn't what you feel. And I think that I carry that lesson forward a lot because I think Greta taught it to me. I think that she wanted me to learn that lesson. I do have a sort of mystical sense of her now. Whereas that's another dimension of my life that might not have opened up without her death, or might not have opened up so early. I'm certainly much more alive to and receptive to a spiritual dimension of my existence and of those around me than I was before her accident. And that has helped me tremendously as well. I remember, this is another marker of my own young privilege. I remember I was dating a girl who had a much different life, and she and I were talking about the need for religion. I remember her saying to me, her eyebrows furrowed in confusion, haven't you ever just had it so bad that you just needed Jesus? I remember being like, no, that was my answer, right? God, no, you know, and that spoke a lot, right? Now I know. It's not Jesus per se, but now I know.
When you look at pictures and videos of Greta today, what goes through your mind?
What a beautiful young family. What a beautiful little kid. What a happy soul. You know, we miss you. We miss you, you know, and that's from me and Stacy and Harrison. Like I do believe in us. And this is where I fully transition into like language that's way more woo-woo and new age. Like I fully believe in us as like a spiritual unit. I don't know if we've ever occupied all at the same time, the same plane of existence, but we're related, we're united. We've been together in some configuration before this, and we will continue to be together in some other configuration after this. I will not be conscious of it, but it will be so, you know, and I think that that's how we continue to honor her.
When I was preparing for this conversation, I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that there is no word for your experience. We have vocabulary for widows. We know what an orphan is, but there is no word for parents who lost a child. Carla Holloway, she's a professor at Duke. She borrowed a word from Sanskrit, viloma, bereaved parent. It means against all natural order. And as a wordsmith yourself, do you have a word for it?
No, I'm a bereaved parent. I'm Greta's father. I don't think I place a ton of importance on having a name for my condition, you know, because my condition is just the facts of my existence, right? Some people might feel the need, and there are lots of reasons to need or want a label, and I understand that they're strong, but I don't feel that need. I thought it was an interesting observation to make, you know, is like something to chew over and to think about. And it was more like, I do think it speaks a little bit to a sort of mythical inherent belief in yourself as not that reachable by tragedy, not that touched by calamity. If a culture has no word for something terrible, it means that it just doesn't want there to be one. You know, we make words for things all of the time. We make up new words every day, right? No one's wanted to invent a word for this. Why would you want to? Like, hey guys, guess what I thought of today? Aren't you excited to get to go use this word?
Did Greta's death affect the relationship with your wife?
I would say that we pulled very closely together and took really good care of one another, and that it didn't affect us in the ways that it pulled us apart. I would say, though, that we've had to navigate a bit how it's felt for one of us in our marriage to have a very clear outlet and the other one to not have as clear of an outlet, right? And not only does one of us have a clear outlet, one of us has a clear outlet that has already received a lot of people coming to say, oh, wow, I read this. This is amazing. And the other person who's lent their experiences to you doesn't have their own, and we have navigated that. And I think it's actually been beautiful in a way because it's spoken to each of our needs to find and develop that. But I would say that the year my book was published was hard. And I think we both had been told by other people with writers in their marriage, like, oh, book publishing time is tough on everyone. But I think that ours was grisly because we both had to show up and be there. And we both believed in it equally, but it left us a little stunned. It took us a few months to pick up and move on from that experience, I would say. I don't want to paint like a portrait of all this wonderful care and attention as somehow an affliction. I mean, it was like more than what you would ever hope for in your life, right? And I'm also like, God, the fact that I did this and the fact that it exists, the fact that someone like you wants to talk to me about my life, about the particulars of what happened to me, about my daughter, that is tremendous, tremendous privilege. Millions of people who have lost children don't even get asked about their children from their neighbors, and they keep them alone in their own hearts, So I would, but I do think that for the two of us, it set off a light, a sort of alarm, like, oh, we're missing something, and this has put a very sharp underline underneath that lack. And I think we've been working to figure that out.
Has Greta's death impacted your relationship with your mother-in-law, Susan, who was there with Greta when it happened?
Oh, I mean, I don't know how to answer that. No is the shortest answer imaginable. She's very deeply involved in Harrison's life. He goes to her house once a week and stays overnight and has been since he was very little. And a couple years ago, it just so happened that Stacy was out of town or working. I honestly don't remember the circumstances anymore because it just was one of the days of life, but it was, I would say 2 years ago. And it was starting to be that this date, which you're speaking to me on this date, right, it had terrible significance the first 5 years, I think. And every year I was like, I have to not do anything. I have to call out from whatever job I have. And, this has to be a day. And it grew less precious. I grew less precious as the years continued, to the point now where you asked me extremely thoughtfully. I was very amazed that you would have even done the math on this and figured it out for yourself, that this was the anniversary of her death. And you asked me, do you not want to record this? And my answer was, well, I mean, no, let's do it. Let's do it. It's Friday, right? It's not just, and I think that there was this time, though, 3 years ago where I knew that dynamic had shifted. And it's because it just so happened I really needed Harrison to stay overnight at Susan's on May 17th.
When I prepared for this conversation and looked at the dates, and all of a sudden I saw, wait a second, May 17th, that's the date we have this scheduled for. I mean,
right. Well, so let me tell you the rest of this anecdote, which is that I asked Susan, I said, you know what today is? And she said, of course I know what today is, or something like that. And I was like, well, I don't have to. And she said, no, it's fine. Bring him over. And she struggled mightily with agoraphobia, which how could you not? Right. The act of going outside, fraught with terror. And anyway, all that is to say that on that day, she decided of her own will, without asking or telling me, to take Harrison for a walk further than she'd ever gone outside. And I think that tells you a lot.
How does your grief feel today?
Like I'm a veteran from a war that happened 30 years ago. Like last year, we had like a brief scare that turned out to be nothing, but it set me off on a series of panic attacks that I hadn't had in 6 years or longer. And I was reminded that, oh, yes, trauma response, you are still a part of me. I haven't left this set of behaviors or reactions behind. This fear still lives in my body somewhere, but I can't just do like an internal scan and look and say, oh, there it is. I find out. And because we talk about Greta, we have pictures of her, and, Harrison's written things in school about her, and she's always present. So it doesn't feel like we've left her behind, but it's just like she's floating sort of above us right now.
What would you want to say to her today?
She's a lot smarter than me by now. She's gone somewhere I'll never be. And she's been there for a long time. She's a way older spirit than she ever was or got to be in her physical form. And I just want to learn from her. I would want to hear from her. I would want her to tell me what she's known, because it's a lot more than I'll ever figure out.
What is the most joyful part of your life right now?
I mean, Harrison, of course, parenting Harrison. He is a huge fan of punk rock and metal, despite being 7 years old. He plays guitar. He's hilarious. He's got a big interest in comedy. He's a budding stand-up at age 7 years old. He offers insights into things that, he cracks people up without trying. He's a huge pain in my butt. He's a huge joy. He's just everything to me. He's my favorite person.
I feel all of that. I went shoe shopping with my 8-year-old last night, and I don't think I've ever laughed so hard. They are personalities, and they have their preferences, and it's something else.
And they have such an enviable perspective on things, because they're seeing things in a way that you can't, but they have a lot of your vocabulary, and they can tell you stuff that you're like, oh my God, he's right, by the way.
Jayson Greene, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you for inviting me to talk. I loved it.
We have a link to Jayson's book, Once More We Saw Stars, at ctpublic.org/audacious. We're going out with the third movement of the Debussy String Quartet. Jayson listens to this piece when he needs deeper expression than words can give. He played it to Greta when she was very little. Jayson and family, I am so sorry for your loss, and I'm so thankful for you sharing your story with the world. On the 1st of every month, I have a reminder in my phone to not get caught up in the mundane. That's advice I took away from our episode about Dr. David Myers. He was a physician who died a year ago after being diagnosed with glioblastoma in 2018. He spoke with Kion about life, love, and mortality in his final months. You will find this and all our 4 years worth of episode at ctpublic.org/audacious or on your favorite podcast app. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. I'd like to wholeheartedly thank Kion Wolf for giving me this opportunity to be here today, for literally and figuratively being with me every step of the way, for editing my conversation with Jayson, and for infusing this episode with her magic. Audacious is also always lovingly produced by Khalil Rahman, Meg Fitzgerald, Meg Dalton, and Katie Tolarski at Connecticut Public Radio in Hartford. We would love to hear your thoughts, questions, and wildest ideas for shows. Email us at audacious@ctpublic.org. Thanks for listening.